Welcome and thank you for joining the presentation. Today we're talking about Ryomen Sukuna, the strongest sorcerer of all time, and examining the fraudulency behind him. Is he a fraud? Is he not? What is he exactly? Manga spoilers lie ahead. Now, let's talk about the strongest. Who is Ryomen Sukuna? Well, first of all, he's a goated villain while he's in Itadori's body. He's malice incarnate, despicable, vile, a murderer, someone who's completely free and bound only by his strength himself. Unfortunately for our boy, this falls off a little bit, and manga spoilers are ahead, when he steals Megumi's body. That is really when the fraud allegations start. But before that, incredible villain. He's a high-level chef. Some might say he's the Gordon Ramsay of the JJK universe. For some reason, half of his dialogue has to do with eating, or filleting, or stripping away the scales of or blue-eyed king Satoru Gojo. And we'll never forget the Crunchyroll translation where he opened his domain and said, "Malevolent Kitchen." He's probably someone's brother. If you spent any time online browsing Jujutsu forums, you'll know that there's a lot of theories about Sukuna having either ingested his twin brother in the womb, or Itadori being the brother himself, or even now some theories are coming up about him being the 10th or so cursed womb brother. He is known as the strongest sorcerer in history. Now, I don't know how to use air quotes correctly, but it did set up a great fight with the marvelous legend himself, Satoru Gojo. He's a daddy's boy, which is great. We love to see that in a villain that's supposed to be evil, malice incarnate. We like a nuanced villain. We see a lot of interaction between him and his father, Mahoraga, especially when he's fighting Gojo, because without his father, I don't really think he could have done much. And finally, he is the slayer of Satoru Gojo. This is important. But let's move on to the meat and potatoes of this video. Let's examine whether Sukuna is or is not a fraud. And we're going to begin by examining the case as to why he is. Well, first of all, he consistently talks shit and gets humbled throughout fighting the one we know as the strongest sorcerer of today. Now, let's look at an example. See, in these panels, we see that Sukuna tells him he is just a fish atop his cutting board. A bit fresher than others, but still a nameless fish. Now, for someone talking so much shit, you might assume, wow, this guy's really fucking strong. He's gonna low diff Gojo. Well, to that, I bring up Exhibit A, and Exhibit B, Exhibit C. Slightly edited, but I think it was funny enough to add. Exhibit D, a 3 against 1, and of course, Exhibit E. Sukuna, if you were truly as goated as you had suggested, you would not be getting your shit rocked over and over again after talking the biggest shit, spitting the biggest shit game talk ever that I have seen in recent history. Next, he told Gojo that he'd kill him in Itadori's body. We can see that in this panel. He says, "When I make this kid's body mine, you'll be the first one I kill." Sukuna, you fucking donut, you're a liar. You didn't do that. And you'll never have the chance to do that again, especially if Gojo's dead, which he's not. More on that in a different video. In that same vein, he took over Megumi's body, potential man's body, gave him depression, and then used him as a meat shield. Now, if I was the villain of the Heian era, the villain of the golden age of Jujutsu sorcery, I would take Unlimited Void myself and be unaffected by it. But no, this man used a 15, 16-year-old kid's body as a meat shield over and over in the fight. Sukuna, come on. He cannot beat our king without Daddy Mahoraga. Now, more on this later. He may have been able to, but I don't see a way of him bypassing infinity without Mahoraga, because clearly he isn't smart enough to do that himself. You know, maybe there are some other options, but no. Gojo was ready with the infinity, and if Sukuna was not in Megumi's body, you cannot convince me otherwise that he would have beat Gojo. Base Gojo over base Sukuna. He was unable to think of strong cleave himself. If I'm Sukuna, and my curse technique is related to using Cleave and Dismantle, the first thing I would think of is, dude, maybe I can spawn Cleave and Dismantle on top of someone instead of having travel time. Maybe I could cleave the world itself. Maybe I could cleave space itself. For someone who talks about knowing the true nature of Jujutsu Sorcerer, he's a fucking fraud. Think of it yourself, bro. You're supposed to be the Einstein of the JJK universe. And lastly, malfunctioning shrine. That's all I have to say about this slide. Now the second part, obviously why he may not be a fraud. He didn't use his whole arsenal against Satoru Gojo. There's the black box, his curse technique itself that we didn't see, his Heian era form. We did not see that against Gojo, so in that regard, you can say that he held back. However, I countered that by saying none of that shit would have worked against Limitless because Gojo himself said, my Limitless is far better. He did actually win. Really not much to say other than I cried when Gojo died and Sukuna was left standing all alone. He is actually a really cool villain. For all the shit talking he gets, for all the slander, fraud, Mickey Mouse accusation, farmer killer accusation Sukuna gets, he is actually a very cool villain and one of the better villain I've seen in anime and manga in recent history and perhaps ever. He is what the QB wishes the QB was if they were supposed to be completely evil. And he was able to beat Gojo in a domain expansion clash. Again, if he attacked Gojo's domain from the inside out, just like Gojo says, he may have won the clash and won the fight earlier on. Narratively, he could not lose there. That's really all that we have to say about this. This is the reason he's not a fraud. Yeah, maybe Gege's mouth is all over Sukuna's penis, or two penises, depending on how you view his body. But Sukuna could not lose to Gojo. He has to lose to Itadori. So in conclusion, what do we have? It doesn't actually make sense to call him a fraud because he is a winner. He did beat our king. He did beat the true strongest sorcerer of all time. But it's funny, so he is a fraud, and that's all. Not entirely sure how the whole man cast is going to beat him. If you guys have any ideas about this, please leave it in the comments below. And consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed this video. Please let me know, do you guys fall on the Gojo PR team or the Sukuna PR team? And do we think Sukuna is a fraud or Go/Joe is a fraud? I would love to know. Stay tuned for more content. Thank you for watching and listening to this presentation. I love you. Goodbye.